Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar, Enhancing Incident Response Readiness for Consumer Goods and Retail Organizations. I'm Nick Essner, Head of IR Solutions at Cygnus. For today's webinar, we have brought together two industry specialists who I've had the opportunity to work with at Cygnus. First, I'd like to introduce and welcome back Jeff Bird, Cybersecurity Program Leader at Marsh. Jeff, would you like to take a moment and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jeff Bird. I lead the Cybersecurity Marketplace program here at Marsh. My background is in cybersecurity. I'm a former CISO and consultant over many years. And my role at Marsh is really to help organizations find the right cybersecurity solutions to help them address their risks.
Thank you for that, Jeff. And now over to our special guest today for our webinar, John Audia. He is manager for IT security, infrastructure, and network at Hamilton Beach. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here on this particular event today. I've spent really for the better part of the past 30 years in infrastructure and cybersecurity compliance across those spaces, and eager to share some thoughts today with you on this webinar.
Thanks a lot, John. And as we kick off the webinar today, please submit your questions via the chat feature. What we will do is at the end, we will start to answer your questions. And obviously at the end, we'll also be following up with a link to this webinar as well. So let's jump into it. So specifically for retail consumer goods, I know that the holidays are coming up. Every retailer talks about the Black Friday, Thanksgiving shopping, but that's not retail anymore. At least looking at the statistics of what we're seeing across the landscape is retail attacks and consumer good attacks. This is not just a once a time year. Just looking at these statistics, this is constant. And so from this perspective, we're always going to be on our toes, so to speak. So when we jump into this of the threat landscape, the targets are obviously across the board from opportunistic, nation state targeted financial crimes across consumer goods and in retail. When I look at some of these statistics here, obviously, AI types of based tools and attacks, that worries me. But one of the things that kind of keeps me up at night is, when we dig into this, is with specifically looking at the supply chain or the third party risk to organizations. And maybe, John, if I'm going to point this first question to you is what keeps you up at night as you're living and breathing this every single day?
Yeah, well, Nick, certainly in the retail sector, there's a considerable amount of concern around the attack vectors that are on the horizon today. Certainly, AI and AI-based attacks have increased significantly. We've seen through our SOC services an increase in AI-based attacks. Of course, deep fakes are another one that's a big concern for us. It's as many folks know on the session today that AI can use just a small snippet of voice and a small snippet of video and can basically recreate a conversation very quickly. So there's a lot of AI-based advanced attacks that concern us as well, and the attack vectors, the malware attack vectors, the phishing scams are increasingly more sophisticated than they have in the past. So those are some of the few things that we're concerned about.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Jeff, I want to ask you more from a 30,000 foot level. I've got a slide here that I wanted to kind of dig into here from your perspective. If we take that step back, what does noticeable to you from a historical perspective, or from like obviously with Marsh from a cyber claims perspective?
Yeah, Nick, it's really interesting. I pulled some data from the Cyber Risk Intelligence Center here at Marsh, where they look at claims trends and activity in given sectors or industries. And so the idea here is to show linkages between the cause of a cyber incident within the industry and the potential business impacts or effects of those incidents. And so when we think about an organization and what they're focused on, it's trying to prevent things like network breach, which you can see accounts for roughly half of incidents that occur in the retail industry based on our claims data here at Marsh. What does that mean for an organization in terms of business impact? Well, they're going to be dealing with ransomware or extortion demands in a third of the cases. And privacy breach continues to be a significant impact and issue that organizations have to deal with due to network breaches. You can see the next biggest bar there is interception or passive collection. You can think of this as website tracking technologies like pixels that are causing organizations to have breaches or incidents that are then reportable, and they really have to deal with the regulatory actions that come out of that and litigation, the costs associated with that. So when we think about the trends that are happening, it really is, what are the causes of the event that people like John and organizations need to try and address with cybersecurity, program and controls? But then what are the business impacts that the organization needs to think about more holistically and plan for? And those strategies come into play around preparing for an incident, having the right team in place, and having the right financial backstops in place to protect your balance sheet, so that for a long-term extortion event or a long-term litigation event, you're able to withstand that and be able to continue to service your customers and drive growth in your business. We'll talk more about sort of those strategies, but this sort of sets the stage, and it's rooted in real claims data. These are actual claims that are reported through Marsh as sort of an insurance broker, and that the insurance community sort of is dealing with on behalf of clients. John, I'm curious, from your perspective, as you look at this chart and think about your strategy and how you address the risks, what resonates here with you in terms of the sort of claims activity at the industry level?
Well, I think that the data speaks for themselves, but for me, this speaks very loudly that it's incredibly important to build a resilient culture in your organization in order to combat a lot of these malicious attacks that we're seeing in the retail industry. Super important to do the regular risk assessments on a quarterly basis. Super important to stay adaptable and resilient, and those kinds of things. Obviously, the business continuity plan, super important from the retail perspective, even from a manufacturing and shipping perspective. So yeah, I mean, those are some of the things that ring true for me. And it's super important to get stakeholder buy-in in terms of your resiliency program and to get the right funding.
This is really interesting, and this is some really rich data that I'm looking at here from Marsh. Pretty powerful, and it's I look at this as unfortunately this is like the as Jeff said, this is the claims data. So if I were to spin this 180 degrees and say, all right, what's the intel data we need to look at before we have a claims, before there's an incident? And John, the first time I met with John is he told me about retail intel. And so John, I'd like you to just maybe elaborate a little bit on your perspective, your approach to how, I mean, there's so much data out there from an intel perspective. How do you consume it? How do you make it actionable? What's your approach?
Well, I think I would advise organizations, if they haven't already, is to invest in a security operations center services, if you will. There are many of them out there, like CrowdStrike, for example, is a major service provider, as you know, for security operations center activities. Arctic Wolf. Look in that Gartner top right and help to make your decisions. But for us, the Security Operations Center is such an important component for us to combat and to deal with adversarial targeting on a daily basis. One of the interesting things about CrowdStrike, for example, they have introduced some new AI Charlotte is a AI-based tool that essentially will spin through the adversarial logs, if you will, the logs, the intel that's coming in, and will quickly pinpoint areas of concern that allows the security analyst to quickly respond to a particular event. What we're seeing here today is just an overall, if you will, threat landscape of some of the major attack vectors that we see from our Security Operations Center, for example. So this is intel that has been gathered over 2024. You can see some of the major attack vectors there. The point we're trying to make here is that your investment in Security Operations Center services super important to the enterprise today.
You said the word investment. So from this perspective, we have threat intelligence about the industry. We see this global map that's kind of scary. How do you translate this into investments? How do you articulate this to the CEO, the CIO, the board as it relates to risk and investments and reducing that risk and managing that?
So at the very top of that, Nick, one of my responses would be is to keep the organization out of the news, to protect shareholder value, to protect the brand. And so from that perspective, those are some of the key inputs, some of the key discussions that we have in terms of investing in cybersecurity tools and protections in the enterprise. Many of you may remember, I think it was around 2021, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, where basically you knew very quickly the impact when a lot of folks were waiting at the gas pump just trying to get gas and essentially gas up their automobiles. That's a very quick reminder of a situation where ransomware completely almost shut down the organization completely. It was a United States event that echoed very quickly. And so again, super damage to the brand there. They were able to recover eventually. It was about a $5 million ask on that ransomware attack. They did pay it. However, they were not able to, in this case, they weren't able to use the decrypt keys that the perpetrators provided. They ended up using their own backups. So the point is, just a point example here, you must protect your brand. You must invest in those types of security services. You can't really build that kind of service in the organization unless you've got a very large organization that wants to invest in security analysts and those types of things. We feel that investing in SOC services is a good use of investment dollars where you've got 24/7 security analysts watching the enterprise. So there's a story there that I think is germane in terms of ensuring that you educate your board, that you educate your executive committee in terms of the value of these kinds of protective services.
Yeah. So, and so now, thinking of the board, the executive, Jeff, maybe a question for you is when we talk about risk and spend and return on investment and managing that risk, how do we talk about that to the executives, to the business, especially, I don't know, like with SEC, cyber disclosure, this is now a boardroom conversation. How do we pivot from, when I look at this world map that's very tactical or risk intel based to that boardroom conversation?
Yeah, Nick, it's a good point. I think the traditional way is through a risk assessment that organizations do against a framework like the NIST cybersecurity framework with a maturity model overlaid. That's kind of the starting point for discussion. There are opportunities to go deeper and do some economic modeling and understand from a risk quantification standpoint what the potential impact of a loss could be to an organization and start to understand the trade-offs between investments. So that's sort of the more mature view of how you might be able to communicate with the board in dollars and cents. That's the language that executives speak in terms of making decisions at that level. I think one of the key lessons learned for me in my former roles and in my current role is that cybersecurity very much is a team sport. And so regardless of how you go about presenting the information, it's about getting the right stakeholders in the room, internally and externally, and having a robust conversation around what are the threats relevant to the organization, what are the gaps in our program, and how can we collectively move forward on those gaps and bring in trusted third parties. At that point, you've got a good foundation to work from. And then, like we'll talk about here in a few minutes, understanding how you prepare for and weather the storm when an incident does happen becomes a critical component to dealing with the threats.
Yep, and I think that's you make a good point there, and I want to kind of articulate one of these intel slides also from the CrowdStrike threat intelligence report, is kind of painting that scary picture, and how understanding these numbers and how these numbers could potentially impact my organization or my clients' organizations. John, how do you digest this information and build upon it and articulate?
Yeah, as you can see, Jeff, the retail industry is experiencing a 55% increase in intrusion frequency. So the bad guys, they're smart from the standpoint that they're going to focus on the most valuable opportunities for them. And so so from a retail and from a banking perspective, and from a technology perspective, that's where they're going to spend their time. That's what this chart, this intrusion frequency speaks to me. And again, this is further support that when you go after funding, for your cybersecurity and your compliance programs, this is the type of data that you should be using. Pull those Verizon annual security reports. Pull those reports from SOC services like CrowdStrike, Arctic Wolf, and those kinds of things to support your underlying argument to go after that funding. And again, that threat landscape is dramatically changing, every day, every month, and so the only way to combat it is to invest in that security technology and those protection technologies.
And this is where I want to kind of pivot the conversation to, okay, what do we do now? What do we do next? And specifically looking at some of those best practices and looking at a life cycle here of preparation, practicing, responding, reporting. From this perspective, this is this proactive framework. John, continuing along these lines, what have you seen successful that you've implemented, that you've built from your experience with your organization or prior?
Sure. I mean, obviously, Nick, what we're talking about here is readiness and being able to respond to an incident. So in Cygnus's incident response framework, from my perspective, is an excellent component of your overall incident response program. In that the Cygnus framework has a template library, if you will, that you can bring in and essentially work a particular incident. What I like to do is use, in conjunction with Cygnus, is also to use what we call the CIS benchmarks, which is the Center for Internet Security. And there, it's a great resource to grab, if you will, a tabletop exercise scenarios. Cygnus does a great job in terms of those templates. What I get from CIS benchmarks is I get the scenario, if you will, the scenario that we leverage within the tabletop exercise, so that we can go through and really create a really strong simulation around insider threats, a cloud compromise, if you will, a financial break-in. And so we can go ahead and build that scenario, leverage the Cygnus framework, and really create an effective tabletop exercise where we train our groups internally. And we're not talking exclusively about IT groups. We're talking about, highly recommend including and expanding out your tabletop exercises with other groups in your organization, your accounting and finance groups, your engineering groups, if you have those, your marketing and sales groups, to really create a holistic tabletop exercise. And I encourage you to do that on a monthly basis. And we have found that people really enjoy these. Honestly, after a certain point, they look forward to them. It's a fire drill, but you really elevate the organization's ability to deal with a particular event. So yeah, highly recommend that.
And you sparked a question here, is that from a number of tabletop exercises, I know a number of my customers that, they have to do one a year. Maybe they're doing two a year now. What have you like from a frequency or cadence? What have you seen successful?
Well, all of us are busy, Nick, right? In our organizations, we're very busy in the enterprise, and all of us are pulled in different directions. A frequency of once a quarter, I think may be a bit aggressive initially. I would recommend starting out with one a year, and then maybe move that cadence on up accordingly. I do think that it's important to ensure that you communicate the tabletop exercise goals with the executive committee, with the board, in terms of what you're after, what you're doing, what the goals are overall. And also too, if you feel like that you can't conduct those kinds of things internally, those tabletop exercises internally, highly recommend leveraging outside resources. Actually, a pen tester, a well-seasoned pen tester that is conversant with tabletop exercises is also a really good place to start. We have leveraged that as well.
Interesting. And I guess, Jeff, from your perspective, I know Marsh works a lot. You guys are constantly working and engaged with your clients from that proactive and that readiness perspective. What is Marsh seen as effective tools or tabletops to help your clients?
Yeah, I'll agree with John that setting the right cadence for your organization matters. If you're at a lower maturity around preparedness and practicing, start small and gain some experience and muscle memory around understanding what those impacts could be and how to plan for them. And then you can build more robust plans and simulations as you go forward. The key point for me that I kind of made earlier is that this really is, work that you don't want to be pulling together for the first time on the day of an incident. You want to have a plan and some connectivity in place at some level before you get into the heat of battle. And that starts pre-incident and is a maturity journey over time. One of the things that your insurance broker like Marsh can help you with is building that collection of specialists to be prepared ahead of time. So whether it's the IT incident response firm, the forensics firm, breach counsel, ransomware negotiator, or other partners along the way, all of those resources can be lined up ahead of time and prepared. And it's better if they know you and your environment ahead of time so they can act quickly on your behalf when you become, subject to a cyber incident or attack. So planning ahead, working with your broker and with your extended team to prepare can have big impacts on the back end in terms of reducing the impact of an event and shortening the time that an event impacts your organization. I will also add, to what John said around making sure that you're aware of the different types of impacts that can occur. We talked about those earlier, but understanding how an extortion event can cause long-term business interruption, for example, and what's your plan for operating in the event of an outage. Things like that can really impact your organization, but require collaboration from business leaders. It's not just the CISO or the CIO who's owning all of it.
Sure. Hey, Jeff, I wanted to add one observational point, and that really is around that I would also, as a consideration point for those on our session today, is to consider the approved forensic experts that your cyber insurer, your underwriter has. Typically they'll have an approved list, if you will, of forensic investigators. The point I'm trying to make here is that if you have Security Operations Center services that are a member of that list, that goes a long way in terms of streamlining and aggressively pursuing working your incident, instead of having to go out and to obtain a forensic investigator that you don't have a relationship with. Having that forensic investigator on the approved list of your cyber insurance underwriter that aligns with your Security Operations Center really goes a long way from my perspective. And the reason why that I mention that is there's going to be a lot of log sharing, aggregated logs, and there's going to be a lot of data that forensic investigation is going to require. And so if your Security Operations Center aligns with that approved list, there's a nice, easy flow of that investigative material that can flow right into your incident response triage, which allows you to more quickly triage that particular security event. So just a point to consider there.
And so I'm curious. A question for either of you is from a third-party forensics provider. Are you guys engaging in these third parties to be participating in some of these exercises, tabletops? How does that look with actually bringing in outside counsel or a PR firm or the forensics provider?
Yeah, great question, Nick. I mean, I think that that I would spawn there that I highly recommend reaching out to your local Homeland Security offices, your local FBI offices, and inviting them to be included in some of these tabletop exercises, or even just some initial discussions with them and to partner with them. That's what they're there for. And that's one of the things that we have done. It has been very valuable along those lines. You can actually go out to a Homeland Security and you can basically request a scheduled discussion or a scheduled meeting with them. They will partner up with you. They'll come on site with you. And then once that relationship is established, you could also roll those into those conversations and those partnerships into some of your tabletop exercises, so that you really begin to get a holistic understanding of the threat landscape from the Homeland Security and also from the FBI, for example. But to also answer your question, absolutely. If you have the opportunity to work with your Security Operations Center or your external security services, roll them into these tabletop exercises as well. Yep, absolutely.
Great. Appreciate that advice. That's good, John. Thank you. All right, so just being mindful of our time, I want to allow us to take some questions that participants have been submitting. So let me pull up this first question here is, what is the best way to build a cyber resilience culture in your organization? I don't know, John, Jeff, which one do you like to take that one?
Yeah. Jeff, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, I think from my past experience and sort of the work we do with our clients, it's really about building a sort of repetitive cadence around this, getting the right people in the room to kick off the discussion, having the discussions around how you're going to react and prepare for an incident, and then practicing. Whether that's quarterly, whether that's annually, start now and build that muscle memory over time.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree there, Jeff. Also, too, for those that are in the retail sector, maybe the manufacturing and shipping sector, there's a lot to talk about in terms of resiliency. I would offer up and recommend from a operational perspective, what we call order to cash. For example, look at your shipping, look at your operations from order to cash, and begin thinking about those business disruptions and what that does to your daily revenue flow. If you've got, for example, shipping operations, distribution center operations, think about disparate network paths. Think about moving your ERP or moving your shipping systems to the cloud, so that there's some redundancy there, so that in the event that you have a backhoe event, you've got a major network circuit that's down, then you can fail over, of course, maybe in an SD-WAN topology where you're up and running and you continue running, and obviously on-prem compared to cloud, if you've got an opportunity to reposition your mission critical, your crown jewels, to the cloud, your shipping systems and your financial systems to the cloud. Highly recommend that. Also, along with your resiliency networks, I think that's going to go a long way for you guys. Absolutely.
John, that's perfect, because I think you actually answered the next question that came on the Q&A, was there some of those best practices for building and ensuring business continuity. So maybe let me elaborate on that question, since you answered it, but spin it to that business continuity as it relates to your critical third party or supply chain, especially in retail. Is there any best practices from that perspective, from a readiness or getting in front of that risk?
Yeah, I mean, the partnerships, I highly recommend there to do your due diligence, to do your SOC your SOC 2 Type 1 and 2 reviews of those service providers, of those partnerships. Ensure that, I would do a vendor management reviews, understand their security posture, understand what does their vulnerability management program look like, what is their incident response program, because those kinds of things, obviously through collateral damage, you're going to be impacted by their inability to not have a strong resiliency program, obviously. So I would do some of those things, ensure that you're doing those SOC 2 Type 1, Type 2 reviews, ensuring that you do vendor security checks and certifications, understand whether they're AICPA certified, ISO 2027, whatever the industry certification is for that particular industry. I do those kinds of due diligence. I think that'll go a long way to help from a resiliency perspective.
Good. All right, and I just want to have time to grab one more question from chat here. This one actually goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about tabletop exercises and readiness. Do you or when should you pull in your board of directors into a tabletop exercise?
Well,
Yeah,
Jeff, did you want to mention that one there, Jeff? That'd be good for you to.
Yeah, just from our perspective here at Marsh, we help clients with tabletop exercises at all levels of the organization, all the way from the board level down to the technical level. And we think it's important to practice at all those levels and find some connectivity between them, because it will become a very collaborative exercise in the heat of battle. And every organization and every role needs to have a sense of what their job is in that particular scenario.
Good. Yeah, I know that's definitely an interesting topic of are we ready to bring in the board for these conversations? Or are we not? So there is it definitely sounds like we need to do it sooner than later.
Certainly agree with Jeff's comments there for sure. I would also further add, Nick, that I think that at some point in your tabletop exercises, as you mature, to bring in the executive committee, to bring in certain leaders at a mature level, once that the organization has gone down the path of a number of tabletop exercises and security scenarios and simulations, if you will. I think that's a good timing to bring in the executive committee on some of those exercises. And the reason why, of course, is that, the reality of it is in a real event, those individuals are indeed going to be on the decision point. Those individuals are going to be called upon to make some significant decisions often. And so there's absolutely good reason to bring them in on those tabletop simulations for sure.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, John. All right, so it looks like this is all the time we have for today. As we discussed the need here for critical preparation, proper incident response planning, obviously tabletop exercises up to and including the board level, and specifically running these items and preparation and response in an out-of-band manner. And so this is where Cygnus comes into play as being an out-of-band platform for managing the end-to-end life cycle of a cyber incident. With that said, I'd like to thank our participants today, both John and Jeff. And shortly, you will all be receiving a link to this webinar and information to learn more about obviously Marsh services and about Cygnus. So I appreciate everyone's time today and looking forward to our next webinar.